So, for anyone who's not familiar with the circumstances of Jim Morrison's alleged death, what is the common perception of how he died?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. That's a fascinating question, and it's one where I always say, how much time do you have? The official story is fascinating because it keeps morphing. Even here we are, 53 years after Jim's reported death of July 3rd, 1971. And the official storyline just keeps shifting and morphing the serpentine trajectory. And that's partly why I undertook this project in the beginning. You know, the controlled narrative states that he died of a heart attack or alcohol poisoning or heroin, or it just keeps, as I said, morphing. And personally, I'm tired of it. I grew tired of it decades ago. I'm a huge fan, first and foremost, and that's why I wanted to make my docu-mystery, as I call it, to bring about, honestly, ultimately, to bring about a deeper understanding of who this person was, and not just regarding his alleged death, but the span of his whole life. Who was this person as a real person, as a human being?
So, as you say, you've been a pretty much a lifelong fan for decades of Jim Morrison and the band, the Doors. But what was the moment which made you think, "Well, hang on, this isn't right. That's not right. I'm going to look into this." There must have been a moment where a moment of clarity where you thought, "Yeah, this is wrong."
Oh, yeah, it's almost, that moment is almost encased in amber in the recesses of my memory. I'm 57 years old now. When I was 18 years old, almost 40 years ago, it was October of 1985. Um, I was supposed to be attending my college classes one fateful day, and I decided to take a little break and go to a bookstore. And in that bookstore, I found on a display a copy of No One Here Gets Out Alive, the first biography of Jim Morrison. And I read that book in one night. That night I binged it, as they say now. Excuse me. And I closed the book. It was around 4 a.m. I remember that. And I closed the book and said to myself verbatim, no fucking way. There's no way he died when they said he, died, etc. So from the jump, I just didn't believe it. It didn't sit right. Um, Nothing added up, and so that was the start of everything for me.
So, in the documentary, you've said that you've had a huge number of contributors, over 1,000 that you've spoken to over the years. The ones I'm quite intrigued by is the surviving band members themselves, John Densmere and Robbie Krieger. When you first approached them, how open were they to the theory?
Oh well, that's a kind of a bit of a running joke or an irony, if you will. Um, John and Robbie, and even Ray Manzarek when he was still alive. I mean, I began the project 12 years ago, well, 12 and a half years ago now, in July of 2012, assuming it would take me maybe 3, 4, 5 years at most. And it just grew and morphed in its own right. And I was in contact with Ray through email when he passed, which it was very unfortunate. That was a big loss. And John and Robbie, I made overtures to them. I even spoke with Robbie's wife, Lynn, on the phone. We had a lovely conversation about 9 or 10 years ago. But ultimately, Doors management was not on board, and that was fine with me because this is truly an independent production. And no sour grapes. But ultimately, John and Robbie weren't part of the interview process.
You've interviewed, several hundred people though on film for the documentary, but I'm just wondering, of everyone that you interviewed, were there some that kind of surprise you, who just wouldn't countenance the theory that Jim Morrison didn't die?
Oh, I mean, it was honestly, every step of this process has been fascinating, and I'm grateful for all of it, the good, the bad, and the otherwise. But mostly, it's been positive, and people have been supportive, and kind. Um, as you said, going back 12 and a half years ago, I reached out to. At this point, I tallied it not long ago. Again, it was over 1,000 people who were connected to Jim. Whether they were lovers, very close, or family members, good friends, or just loose acquaintances, over 1,000. And that entailed emails and phone calls and texts and even handwritten letters. I think I might have sent a telegram there and somewhere. No, I'm kidding. And of those 1,000 plus, I interviewed about 130 on camera. And even that was Herculean. I couldn't get them all into the mix of a 3.5 hour docuseries. Otherwise, that docuseries would have been, over 24 hours in length. So
we've got the one person we have got to talk about, obviously, is Frank X. We've got
yeah,
to talk about Frank X.
I see in my dreams and my nightmares.
So the thing that crossed my mind, because he runs throughout all three parts of the documentary series, and I'm just wondering, certainly in the very beginning when you've encountered him, was there ever a doubt in your mind that if he was Jim Morrison, why would he risk blowing his cover by doing an interview?
That's a great question. And to backtrack a little to your last question, I'm sorry, I didn't sleep very well last night. A little foggy this morning here where I am. So to back a little bit, everyone had their own Jim, their own proprietary version of Jim. I literally had some of Jim's former lovers say to me, "That's not my Jim. I'm not seeing my Jim in your trailer," etc. And I respect that. I mean, everyone's got their subjective Jim. I have mine, and that's fine. We're all entitled to that, I guess. It comes down to subjective opinions, So yes, there are those who believe he died. There are those who believe he didn't die. There are those who told me flat out that he spoke of faking his death. As far as Mr. X, I honestly, at the risk of spoilers, of course, I really, it just speaks for itself in the docu-mystery, as I call it. This is an individual who appeared on my radar 8 years ago right now, December of 2016. And as I've said many times, I didn't so much find him as he allowed me to find him. And it was almost like a game of cat and mouse, if you will. A fascinating game that's still continuing to this day. He's an absolute enigma. Let me just leave it like that. You have to experience it, which of course everyone will be able to in just a few weeks on January 13th when it's released.
So, with all the evidence that you've gathered, and there's a whole wealth of it, I would respectfully suggest that quite a bit of it is circumstantial. But regardless of that, it does all seem to boil down to DNA testing of the body that's in the sealed coffin. So with everything that you've got, have you ever, was there ever consideration to presenting this evidence to the French authorities to do just some DNA testing?
That's a great question. I appreciate that. I love those out of the box, thinking outside the box questions. I guess this is where I would say, many, so many people have asked me, including my own friends and family, "Hey, you've been to the grave, right, Jeff?" And I always say, "Well, no." And they're like, "You of all people, you haven't been there?" And then it's like a punchline, I always say, "Well, why would I go to all that effort to fly from the US to Paris to visit Jim's grave if he's not in it?" And then I do a little rim shot.
Yeah.
That's always sort of half tongue in cheek, I guess, just to bring some levity to such a heavy process. Um, but yeah, I mean, you know, I would,
Because it would give you a definitive answer,
if
wouldn't
you
it?
suggested, that would be fantastic, you know, because, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just sorry to butt in, Jeff. I was just going to say
No, no.
it would give you a definitive answer, though.
Yes, and you know what you said earlier about you know, circumstantial evidence. As my private investigator, Cheryl Bombaugh, who I hired for the project, she's in the documentary. She said, you know, you may have ultimately you may have circumstantial evidence, but it's a veritable mountain of circumstantial evidence. You know, I mean, how many coincidences can add up to fact over time? It's fascinating, and you know, when someone is gone, you know, when a major figure like Jim Morrison isn't here to speak for himself per se, you know, the public or those of us who chose to play armchair detective, you know, if you will, we're left ultimately, I mean, let's face it, we're ultimately left to speculation by and large, because the puzzle pieces, we don't have all of them. You know, I think I have most of them after 38 years of research and 12 years of work on the docuseries. Um, but yeah, I think there's a difference between speculation and informed speculation. There's definitely a distinction there.
So then finally, question that I did want to ask you was that you've got on board in the documentary the screenwriter Randall Johnson,
Yes.
who had co-written the Oliver Stone film, The Doors, with Oliver Stone co-writing. Um, do you think he's reevaluated the end scene of that film in light of what's been discussed and what he knows now, and what maybe has come to light or not come to light?
Well, I certainly can't speak for Randall Johnson, but I will say he seemed like a great dude, a good guy, and we really enjoyed, you know, our time together for the interview, and we've kept in touch over the years. In fact, we just texted just the other day. So I really enjoy him, and I will say that he surprised me. He sort of joked with me and said, you know, I was you 25 years before me, you know, when he was trying to get to the real Jim Morrison, the human Jim Morrison, you know, to flesh that out, as it were. And but yeah, Randall has a healthy skeptic's eye, as you will see in the doc. He really sort of blew my mind there, and then he, you know, it was great to hear him clarify what I thought I knew, in that he wrote the original screenplay for what became the Oliver Stone movie, The Doors, in 1991. So Randall wrote the treatment and screenplay before Stone was ever even brought on board. And then Stone came along, according to what I was told by Randall, and, you know, as often is the case in Hollywood, just sort of, it's not like they sat down together per se to really work on the screenplay. It was Randall's finished version was handed off to Stone, and then Stone sort of took his artistic license with it.
Actually, one thing that has occurred to me always with the sort of conspiracy theories and people, and this I'm taking this from films now, you know, people who dig into conspiracy theories and then mysterious things start to happen, you know, bricks being thrown through the window with messages saying, don't go looking any further, or that sort of thing. Have you had anything like that?
There should be a brick coming through this window any minute, I'm thinking. You'll know if I get, you know,
Yeah.
on the head. Um, that's interesting. I love your line of thinking. You know, I've said this many times too, but not in this particular context. There's a meme, you know, an online meme that's floated around for, I don't know, 20 some years, give or take, and it says real succinctly, you know, conspiracy theorist, a derogatory term used to dismiss a critical thinker, and that really resonates with me, you know, because I've long thought of myself as a critical thinker, long before the internet. You know, I'm old enough. I'm almost 60 years old. You know, I when I first started researching Jim, you know, as I said in 1985, I mean, there was no internet, at least for those of us in the public. You know, so it's sad to me that, you know, the internet is a feeding ground for the haters and trolls of the world, you know, who
Yeah.
have nothing better to do than try to just label everyone a conspiracy theorist or slap a tinfoil, you know, metaphorical tinfoil hat on everyone. At the end of the day, I consider myself a critical thinker.
So then, just before we end, this is not the first sort of a documentary that you've made, I understand, along kind of, I'll use the phrase conspiracy theories. How, have you got a sort of another sort of documentary about a theory to explore that you're going to do next?
That's I appreciate that. I have a number of topics that I've long been interested in. You know that if I were to do this again, and at
12
the moment
years.
I can't fathom it. To be honest with you, it's just taken I gave this everything I had. You know, including my life savings. And I'm grateful for all of it. You know, no one forced this on me. I chose this, and I'm grateful for this journey and the experience. I can't really go into detail about what I may do in a future documentary, as I like to say. I've been told I coined that term. I've been using it since I founded my company in July of 2010. So who knows? But if I do another documentary, you'll be one of the first to know. And in the meantime, I have a book coming out called 127 Fascination, Jim Morrison Decoded, which is a companion piece to Before the End, searching for Jim Morrison.
I am going to have to start using that phrase docu-mystery rather than conspiracy theory. So thank you for that, Jeff. And thank you for your time as well. It's an intriguing documentary. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.